Have you ever asked yourself why certain desires scare you? Why even when you're completely alone, a wave of shame washes over you? And why does the silence of the early morning feel more honest than all the words spoken throughout the day? Carl Jung once said, "What you do not bring into consciousness appears in your life as fate. But what if your fate is being shaped by something you pretend doesn't exist? Something you've repressed so thoroughly that you can't even tell whether it's a desire or a fear." Every one of us carries a hidden version of ourselves, a version that remains unspoken, tucked away in the shadows. It's not the self we present to the world. It's a darker self, pulsing with emotion, intensity, and erotic energy, but not in the shallow, overexposed way we've come to associate with the word. It's a raw, primal kind of sexuality, one that has nothing to do with the instant gratification we're bombarded with on screens. This force lives beyond our conditioned morality, beyond the rigid definitions of good and bad. This isn't about what you want. This is about what you can't bear to want. Maybe you've never said it out loud. Maybe you've laughed to hide it. Maybe you've prayed to forget it. But it's still there. That part of you didn't disappear. It stayed alive, and it's watching you. In this video, we're going to open a door that most people avoid their entire lives, not for curiosity's sake, but to reclaim what was once exiled. We'll explore your sexual shadow, not as something pathological, not as something broken, but as a map, a brutal and honest map leading to the deepest self-awareness you're capable of. And maybe, just maybe, by the end of this journey, you'll realize that the part of you that frightened you the most was the one longing the most to be embraced. Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe deeply. There's no rush. What we're about to touch isn't just a theory. It's you. It's the part of you you've tried to bury in darkness. There's a certain hour of the day, you probably know it well, when everything becomes quiet. The city sleeps. Your phone goes silent. The world seems to forget you exist. And yet, in that precise moment, something else begins to stir. A presence, a whisper, a sensation with no name, a heat that rises from within, uninvited, a thought that doesn't follow logic. It's not pornography, it's not love, it's not lack. It's something far more primitive, more stripped down. A whisper that rises from deep inside you. You've never shared this with anyone, maybe not even with yourself, but there's a part of your sexuality that has never been truly seen. It was shaped not by truth, but by silence, by invisible punishments, by disapproving looks in childhood, by religions that offered salvation in exchange for your body. From a young age, you learned certain desires must not exist. Jung called this the sexual shadow, not because it's dirty or evil, but because it was hidden. And everything that is hidden begins to rot, not in its essence, but in how it's expressed. You didn't lose desire. You lost permission to feel it as it is. It's not uncommon to hear someone say, "I don't feel desire anymore." But when I listen closely, I hear something different. What they really mean is, I lost touch with the part of me that felt alive. The shadow is not only made of perversions, it's also made of sweetness that never had a place to exist, of caresses that were rejected, of fantasies no one ever cared to hear. It's the unbearable blend of what you want and what you fear. It watches you between the lines. It stirs something in you when you see someone and your body reacts before your thoughts do. It paralyzes you when connection becomes too real. It sabotages you when love finally begins to grow. Sometimes it appears as disgust, something repulses you. But if you look closely, that disgust is nothing more than fear in disguise. Fear of being weak, fear of enjoying it, fear of losing control. Why? Because your sexuality isn't just about pleasure. It's about identity. It's about what moves you when no one is watching. It's the silent choreography between instinct and soul. And if you keep pretending this part of you doesn't exist, it won't vanish. It will retaliate. It will show up in your most bizarre dreams, in your unexplainable behaviors, in those relationships that start with fire and end in emotional drought. It will manifest as compulsion or apathy, as obsession or numbness, as guilt or cynicism. The truth is, your sexual shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It just wants to be heard. But to hear it, you'll need to shatter the image you've built of yourself. The good boy, the enlightened woman, the spiritually evolved being. None of those masks survive the touch of the shadow. And the shadow knows that. It doesn't want performance. It wants presence. How many times have you pretended to be someone more acceptable just to be loved? How many times have you swallowed your truth because it felt inappropriate? How many times have you traded what was real for what felt safe? Jung said, "Sexuality is the most intense expression of life energy." And that intensity is terrifying, because when it finally rises, it doesn't ask for permission. It breaks through. It pierces. But there is beauty in that. There is liberation. When you finally stop running from your sexual shadow, you'll discover something you never expected. That within the place you were most afraid to look lives the most honest part of you. And it's only asking for one thing: to come home. You may not remember the exact moment you started to go silent, but it happened. Maybe it was a careless phrase thrown at you by someone you admired. That's wrong. Or a cold stare in response to a moment of innocence when all you wanted was to understand your body. Or maybe it wasn't a moment of trauma at all. Maybe it was the silence, the total absence of conversation, as if what you were feeling didn't even deserve to be named. Carl Jung believed that in order to survive, the ego develops mechanisms of protection, and one of the most effective defenses it adopts is exile. Not physical exile, but psychological. Everything that appears too dangerous, too wild, or too disruptive for the environment we grow up in gets pushed into the basement of the unconscious. It's not erased, it's hidden. But make no mistake, what you repress does not disappear. It merely transforms. Desire that is buried doesn't become peace. It mutates into symptoms, into restlessness, into strange habits you call vices or phases, into apathy disguised as indifference, into an inner discomfort that you try to silence with endless distractions, scrolling through social media, binge eating, seeking dopamine hits, anything that keeps you away from yourself. Shame is the prison that's built when desire crashes against a moral wall. And the higher that wall, the more fragmented you become. You start to live in fragments. One part of you feels, another judges what you feel, and yet another tries to hide them both. You begin to perform life instead of living it. On the outside, you're the well-adjusted person, rational, calm, collected. But inside, you're a volcano of unvalidated emotions, whispering in symbols and metaphors, waiting to erupt in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes, that volcano wears the mask of perfectionism, or hides behind cold rationality. Sometimes it shows up as emotional numbness that you've convinced yourself is maturity. But the truth is much simpler and far more brutal. Are you tired of pretending that you don't feel what you feel? Jung insisted that the shadow is not something to eliminate, but something to illuminate. And perhaps the most difficult part of that shadow to face is the sexual shadow, because it carries not only instinct, but also generations of guilt, cultural guilt, religious guilt, ancestral shame. Voices whispering, "To be worthy of love, you must be pure." But here's the paradox. No one can truly love what stays hidden in the dark. The more you try to scrub away your desire, the more twisted it becomes. Because sexuality doesn't respond to censorship. It rebels. It is the cry of the body, not the monologue of the mind. And when that cry is silenced, it returns in the form of obsession. Not with pleasure, but with the very thing you are told not to feel. This is the most perverse mechanism of the psyche. You disconnect from the original source of your desire and begin to seek replacements. Cheap, hollow substitutes that never satisfy. Disposable relationships, empty fantasies, sensory overloads that numb rather than awaken. Because the desire is no longer whole. It has been distorted. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself, how many of your sexual decisions were really desperate attempts to reconnect with your own soul? How many times did you give yourself away, not out of freedom, but out of fear of feeling nothing at all? Shame creates a cruel paradox. You crave, but hate yourself for craving. You search, but sabotage what you find. You touch, but disconnect while doing so. Slowly, you become accustomed to half living, half awake, half numb. That's what fragmentation is. And it doesn't start in adulthood. It begins with the child, who learned far too early that the body is dangerous, that impulses are shameful, that surrender is weakness. That child still lives in you. And that child doesn't need punishment. That child needs to be heard, without mockery, without theology built on guilt, without the spiritual arrogance that suggests desire is inferior to the soul. Because in truth, desire is the language of the soul. You've just forgotten how to speak it. Relearning that language hurts. It demands that you stop running. It asks you to feel what you've avoided for years. It forces you to confront not the desire itself, but the pain of having abandoned yourself for the sake of being accepted. The sexual shadow only becomes a monster when treated as the enemy. But if you sit with it, listen to it, really listen, you'll discover something profound. It doesn't want to destroy your life. It wants to give it back to you. Maybe that's why, in the middle of certain nights, you feel an emptiness that no distraction can fill. Because what you're missing is not pleasure, it's integration. And the path back to yourself begins with one brutal, soul-cracking question. What part of me did I have to kill to be loved? When you answer that, something breaks. And in that breaking, the healing begins. Sometimes people come into your life like a whisper. Others arrive like wildfires. And you don't always understand why. Why that person? Why that absurd chemistry that defies logic, common sense, even your own morality? Jung warned us, everything that fascinates or irritates us about another person reveals something buried within ourselves. You think you're falling in love with someone, but more often than not, you're trying to reconnect with a part of yourself that you were forced to abandon. That's how projection begins. You look at another person, but what you're truly seeing is your own reflection, the desire you suppressed, the freedom you denied yourself, the boldness, the intensity, the raw passion that you once had, or maybe never had, but always longed for. Projection is a survival mechanism for the exiled soul. Since you can't touch that part of you directly, you try to touch it in another. But that's not love, that's lack. You're not relating to a person. You're relating to the symbol they represent for your wounded shadow. And symbols, unlike people, don't reciprocate. They trigger. That's why so many people fall into chaotic, destructive relationships. It's not stupidity. It's the unconscious at work. It's the shadow crying out, "There, that's mine. I need to come home." But no one can endure being a mirror forever. And when the reflection reveals too much, the illusion shatters. You run, you break, you sabotage. Duality takes over. You want, but you fear wanting. You reach out, then pull back. You seduce, but never truly surrender. You split into two, one who loves and one who watches love with suspicion. And this is how double lives are born. On the surface, you're the balanced adult, logical, put together, reliable. But underneath, there's a quiet chaos, a secret choreography of fantasy and repression, impulse and guilt, desire and escape. A private dance between the self you present to the world and the truth you carry inside. How many times have you gotten involved with someone who awakened your most intense instincts, only to later feel a strange sense of repulsion? Not towards the person themselves, but because they saw too much. They saw what even you try to hide from yourself. They glimpsed parts of you that you keep buried under layers of personality, control, and image. That's why relationships rooted in projection are so fragile. They're not truly between two people. They're between an ego and a mirror. And the thing about mirrors is, sooner or later, they shatter. Not because the other person did something wrong, but because the reflection became unbearable. It stopped being flattering. It began to reveal. But there's another kind of projection, more subtle, more corrosive. It's not driven by desire, but by judgment. You know that person who deeply unsettles you, the one who seems too vulgar, too wild, too free, too sensual, the one you instinctively criticize. Look again. Really look. Maybe they're not the problem. Maybe they're simply expressing something you've always longed to feel, but were taught to suppress. That person isn't your enemy. They're the messenger of your shadow. Jung said, "The unconscious speaks in symbols, and there's no symbol more powerful than desire." Desire is the voice of your inner world, calling out through attractions you can't explain, through the things that excite and scare you at the same time, through what you condemn in others, but if you were brutally honest, you'd find within yourself. And if you don't accept that shadow, it doesn't disappear. It relocates. It projects. It seeps into your relationships, your obsessions, your criticisms. You begin searching in others for what you lost in yourself. But that's unfair, because no one was born to carry the weight of your repression. The truth is, you want someone who will liberate you, but you're terrified of being seen. Because to be truly seen, in the core of your desire, is a risk. It's not a physical stripping. It's the removal of your persona, the mask you wear to stay acceptable, likable, safe. That mask is convenient, even comforting, but it's not real. And how many relationships have you sabotaged because you were afraid of feeling too much? How many people did you push away because what you had with them exposed too much of yourself? How often have you hidden behind cynicism, sarcasm, or emotional detachment just to avoid the raw vulnerability of wanting with an open heart? Sexual shadow, when not embraced, decays from the inside and seduces from the outside. You become desirable but inaccessible, physically present but emotionally absent. You reach out to touch but never allow yourself to be touched. And here lies the paradox. You crave intensity but fear the abyss. You want connection but fear being unveiled. You long for pleasure but dread losing control. So you start living a double life and call it balance. But that's not balance. That's fragmentation. True balance is when desire and consciousness coexist. It's when you no longer need to hide in others or reflect yourself onto them. It's when you look in the mirror and see not only the version of you the world accepts, but also the parts it never knew existed. And still, that is you. Integration begins the moment you stop seeking in others what you've abandoned in yourself. So ask yourself, who in your life was a mirror of your shadow? Who did you love, not for who they were, but for what they represented? And who did you judge for touching a part of you that you were never allowed to be? When you answer these questions with ruthless honesty, projection dissolves, and in its place, something new arises, a real encounter. You spent your life trying to be someone acceptable, someone polished, someone appropriate, and in the process, you left entire parts of yourself behind, parts that now call to you, not with words, but with discomfort, with restlessness, with a deep ache you can't quite name. That's what Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is not about transcending desire, it's about walking through it. The sacred doesn't lie outside of desire, it lives right at its center. But to reach it, you need courage. Courage to make contact with your own truth. Not the truth you post on social media. Not the polished one you present in perfectly structured conversations. I'm talking about the truth that still trembles inside of you. The one that hasn't yet found words. The one that lives behind your eyes, in your pulse. And have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to live fragmented? To censor every thought, to control every urge, to smile when all you want is to scream, to fake calm while inside everything is collapsing? That exhaustion isn't physical, it's existential. It's your soul crying out, "You forgot me." And in that forgetting, you buried more than desire. You buried the life force itself, the very energy that lets you feel, create, breathe, love. Jung believed that repressing sexuality doesn't just suppress pleasure, it damages the soul. Because sexual energy is symbolic. It is the archetypal fire of life-seeking expression through you. When that energy is silenced, everything begins to empty. Creativity dries up, relationships turn cold, spirituality becomes a hollow ritual, and life becomes maintenance. You wake up, do what you must, smile so others won't worry, and go to bed with a hollow you can't explain, a void no achievement seems to fill. But here's the truth. That emptiness is not your enemy. It's your compass. It's guiding you back to what you've lost, back to your aliveness. And maybe, just maybe, if you dare to follow it, not run from it, you'll find not just the parts you buried, but the wholeness you've always craved. But there is another path, one that doesn't begin with struggle or resistance, but with an almost unthinkable gesture. Sitting down with your shadow. Not to obey it, not to give in to its every whim, but simply to listen, to truly hear what it has been trying to say all these years, to understand where it comes from, to hold space for the parts of yourself that were silenced long ago. Perhaps it will speak of a childhood where desire became dangerous, where expressing yourself meant risking rejection or punishment. Maybe it will bring back memories you swore you buried forever. Memories that still linger, quietly shaping your choices and your fears. Maybe it will reveal that what you once called freedom was just a carefully disguised escape. That what you thought was emotional maturity was in truth a subtle form of anesthesia. And in that moment, something shift. Because when the shadow is finally heard, it begins to change. It stops being a destructive impulse and starts becoming a message. It ceases to be compulsion and transforms into awareness. No longer something that controls you from the depths. It becomes something that can guide you with clarity and purpose. This journey is not about surrendering to every desire that arises. It's about understanding what those desires actually mean. What part of you is knocking, asking to be seen, to be born? What truth is being censored inside you? What need has been ignored for too long? Integration is not a magical act. It's not an overnight fix. It is painful. It is slow. It is raw. Because it asks you to grieve the identities you built to survive and invites you finally to begin living. Yes, fear will come. You'll feel the urge to retreat, to go back to the comfortable numbness of denial. But if you have the courage to keep going, if you dare to stay present with what hurts, you'll find something you've never experienced before. Not perfection, but presence. You'll feel the freedom of existing without needing to apologize for who you are. The permission to want without shame. The capacity to love without fragmenting yourself in the process. And from this space, something powerful happens. That exiled sexual energy, the one you locked away, labeled as shameful or inappropriate, returns. But this time, it doesn't come back as a secret or a wound. It comes back as pure life force, a conscious flame, a creative fire, aligned with your whole being. And you begin to choose differently. You seek relationships that touch your soul, not just your surface. You start creating things you once didn't feel worthy of creating. You feel pleasure without guilt. You say yes with every cell in your body, and you say no with unwavering clarity, because now you know who you are. Your sexual shadow is no longer the enemy. It becomes your ally. It is the guardian of your inner fire, and it has always been there, quietly waiting for you to stop running, to finally say, I'm ready. Ready to stop living in halves. Ready to stop repeating patterns you never understood. Ready to stop hiding what you feel. Ready to be whole. And when that moment comes, you realize that it was never about controlling your desire. It was always about honoring your humanity. You made it this far, and that alone says more than you know. Maybe you felt exposed, or vulnerable, or maybe deeply seen. Maybe something within you stirred that you haven't told anyone about, or maybe, for the first time, you felt a quiet longing to listen to yourself without judgment, without filters. What happens next is your choice. You can go back to pretending that your shadow is just a mistake, a detour. You can return to the surface of life, where everything appears functional, clean, acceptable, and hollow. Or you can finally accept that the most honest part of you has always lived in the dark, watching, waiting, asking for a place to exist, and integrating that part of you. It's not weakness, it's courage, because only someone who is tired of being divided is capable of becoming whole. Carl Jung gave us mirrors, he gave us pathways, and now you know where to look. I remember a night, in the early hours, when I woke up with my heart racing, for no apparent reason, or rather, for all the reasons I was too afraid to face. I had dreamed of something that exposed me far too deeply, not sexually, but emotionally. I woke up feeling ashamed of myself. I thought, what is wrong with me? But now, I see it differently. It was only my shadow, knocking on the door. It took me years to find the strength to open it. And when I did, I didn't find a monster. I found a child, the child I once was. waiting to be seen. That's why I created this space. Not to teach you, but to remind you of something you already know. Somewhere deep inside, you are not alone. And there is nothing wrong with feeling deeply. If this video touched something inside you, if it stirred a wound you thought had already healed, or uncovered one you didn't even know existed, remember this: that pain is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your return to yourself, your true self, the one that's been buried under layers of silence, fear, survival, and adaptation. That ache in your chest, it's a sign that something ancient inside you has just remembered its way home. Maybe you've been walking in circles for years, searching outside what was always hidden within. And maybe tonight, without even realizing it, you took your first step back toward the core of who you are. If you made it this far, if you stayed until the end, it wasn't by accident. You didn't just watch a video. You walked through the tangled forest of your own psyche. You lit a trembling lantern with the fragile fire of your curiosity and dared to look at the desire, the fear, the longing, the questions that live there in the dark. And now you're thinking of leaving without saying anything, without clicking like, without subscribing, without leaving a single word down in the comments after everything you just faced inside yourself. Click like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments anything. Even if it's just, I'm ready to look within, or my shadow no longer screams alone, or make up something better. But speak, because yes, I do read it all. Every word, every whisper someone dares to leave in this strange space where souls meet through screens. And those videos you see appearing on the screen right now, they aren't just suggestions, they're doors. And not every door is safe. Not every door wants to be opened. Some will take you further into yourself. Others might take you places you're not yet ready to go. And some don't have a way back. So choose wisely. I'll be waiting for you on the other side, or in that next sleepless night, when your shadow decides it has been ignored for far too long.